Without a doubt, Biden can be respected for one thing.
Soda!
Hello, and welcome back to H-White Politics. Yes, it's been a while. Yeah, look at the new channel intro. I probably go over some of it there. But it's so easy to be caught up in the hatred and negativity. That is, without a doubt, a cliche in and of itself, but it's true, and I want to do a little something to work against the constant flow of vitriol surrounding our political world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to suggest that the Biden admin is all around good. If you know me, then you know my beliefs are pretty much antithetical to every single president ever. On a moral basis, I don't consider any of them good. But I also don't consider any of them categorically bad either. So what I want to do right now is to go over the executive orders Biden has signed during his presidency and talk about the ones that I think are generally good that we would be worse off without. Because they do exist. And it's good to highlight that not everything is doom and gloom in our government. You know, I have to say it, but if you appreciate what I do here, or you just like me for my looks, totally respectable by the way, I would highly appreciate liking the video and subscribing. I get a hit of dopamine every time the little numbers go up. And what else can I ask for? Also, the link to the overall website is available in the description below, and every individual EO I mentioned will also be linked separately so you're able to go look at it yourself. And I should also add that I won't necessarily be discussing the results of each EO, as that's something that research simply won't exist for, at least in most cases. I mean, maybe for some of them, but that's not really the goal here. I want to show that good was tried, even if some of it ended up failing for one reason or another. So, starting with 2021, let's see what we got. On January 20th, 2021, Biden signed EO 13985, titled Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities Through the Federal Government. It serves to collect information regarding the barriers certain marginalized groups face in accessing the opportunities other people have, and asks for the White House to conduct research into methodology for solving said barriers. EO 13988, on that same day, Biden signed Preventing and Combating Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. In line with the White House policy and Supreme Court rulings on issues of discrimination, it asks of various agencies to review their actions, documents, and the like in order to see how well they comply with being equitable and non-discriminatory on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. If they are in violation of being discriminatory, whatever actions are problematic are set to be removed or otherwise modified in order to fix it. EO 13990 is the Protecting Public Health and Environment and Restoring Science to Tackle the Climate Crisis. It forces a review of all agency actions from the past 4 years at the time of signing, which was the same day as the last two. And if they are not in compliance with environmental justice, such as by failing to reduce emissions or not protecting our national parks, for example, they need to be modified or moved to be in line. EO 13994, signed on January 21st, in ensuring a data-driven response to COVID-19 and future high-consequence public health threats, which sought to increase the data analytical power of the relevant government agencies regarding the contemporary pandemic, and to allow that information to be as readable and accessible to the public as possible. It does also place an emphasis on de-individuated information, wherein nothing personal ought to be public as regards the information collection. Additionally, not only did it set the US response to be based around this data, but it also asked for innovation of public health data and analysis going forward in case it was ever necessary again. EO 14006 is a big one now, signed on January 26th, entitled Reforming Our Incarceration System to Eliminate the Use of Privately Operated Criminal Detention Facilities. It aims to, well, reform our incarceration system to lessen our use of private prisons. These names are all incredibly self-explanatory, and honestly, it's already a challenge to provide comment. And we're only the 5th one mentioned here. But regardless, this is a huge step forward in my humble opinion. The order doesn't do much, but it is pushing us in the right direction, which hopefully will not be reversed in the future, curse you Apollo. It specifically says that the Attorney General will not renew DOJ contracts with private prisons, so hell yeah. Signed on February 2nd, we have EO 14012, called Restoring Faith in Our Legal Immigration Systems and Strengthening Integration and Inclusion Efforts for New Americans. Yeah, so basically it instructs relevant agencies, like, get this, the Department of Immigration, to come up with a review of various policies and agency actions for the barriers that exist both for immigrants and potential immigrants, and moreover asks for a plan on how to rectify said barriers, helping immigrants get through the process efficiently and helping them integrate into society. EO 14021 from March 8th aims to mitigate discrimination based on sex, which includes orientation and gender identity within education. It is appropriately titled Guaranteeing an Educational Environment Free from Discrimination on the Basis of Sex, including Sexual Orientation or Gender Identity. It had the DOE review their policies and actions and come up with new plans as necessary and treat such discrimination. Worker Organizing and Empowerment, or EO 14025, signed on April 26th, created a task force of, frankly, a lot of people, at minimum 23 from various departments, agencies, and advisory positions, as well as leaving room open for more, whose titular task was to aid in worker organization through the formation of labor unions. Basically, help workers who want to unionize to do so, and help maintain the unions we have from predatory business practices. That said, their role was purely advisory. They would suggest policy changes on this front, but had no authority themselves. Still, definitely a good thing, I'd argue. Now, this might be one of the more controversial ones I'm going to mention, funnily enough, but suck it up, this is my video, you can go make your own. Executive Order 14026, signed April 27th, increased the minimum wage for federal contractors. Guess what it's titled? Yup, increasing the minimum wage for federal contractors. Those contracted by the federal government and their subcontractors would start receiving $15 an hour minimum wages, a wage which was set to increase in response to Consumer Price Index. Additionally, tipped workers working for the government, which I suppose are probably a rare occurrence but apparently exist, have their minimum upped to $10.50. Skipping ahead in time a little bit now, Executive Order 14035, signed June 25th, is an expansion of the previously mentioned EO 13985, using the information collected from that order and using it to construct better plans on addressing the problems in inequality and accessibility. It also includes a, quote, comprehensive framework to address workplace harassment, including sexual harassment, which clearly defines the term harassment, outlines policies and practices to prevent, report, respond to, and investigate harassment, promotes mechanisms for employees to report misconduct, encourages bystander intervention, which is always pleasant to put more emphasis on. It's called Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in the Federal Workplace. Man, these names are so boring. EO 14040, upcoming on 9/11's 20th anniversary, in fact signed just 8 days prior to the date, on September 3rd, has the goal of increasing transparency. Named declassification reviews of certain documents concerning the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, it ordered a review of currently classified documents and ordered a lot of them to be declassified. Unfortunately, it was not a categorical declassification, and a lot was based on a review wherein certain documents were allowed to stay classified at discretion, depending on if national security would be compromised, but hey, more declassification is better than none. Although some things were specifically called out, so not everything was at discretion. Like, damn, I didn't know Biden was cool with it like that. Imposing sanctions on certain persons with respect to the humanitarian and human rights crisis in Ethiopia, or EO 14046, and signed on September 17th. Guys, get this. It imposes sanctions on certain persons involved in the contemporary humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia. Really putting my writing skills to the test here. But yeah, economic sanctions were set to be imposed on individuals determined to be complicit or actively involved in worsening crises and human rights violations in Ethiopia, as well as other related facets such as the obstruction of humanitarian aid, undermining the democratic processes of the country, or just the military in general. Yeah, so from here on out, I'm going to stop mentioning the titles in full, unless I find a special reason to do so, as you should get the gist by now. The titles are almost always entirely self-explanatory. So, on September 17th was signed EO 14047, which added measles to previously existing list of quarantinable communicable diseases. So, if you catch measles, you can be quarantined. This may seem odd, given that it was eradicated in the US, But frankly, I support it. I see no reason such a devastating disease shouldn't be quarantined in the event it does return. EO 14053, signed November 15th, is probably one of my favorites to talk about so far. It is called Improving Public Safety and Criminal Justice for Native Americans and Addressing the Crisis of Missing or Murdered Indigenous People. This is a problem almost no one talks about. There is a veritable epidemic of missing and murdered Native Americans, and frankly, the local governments seem to be in on it, allegedly, definitely allegedly. This extends beyond the border of the US, too, and is huge in Canada as well. This order is definitely not the holy grail solution, and of course Biden is not the first president to address this, but he did address it, and it is another important step in the long road to a solution. I recommend you look into this topic on your own, it's crazy. Woo! Space Council! No, seriously, EO 14056, literally titled the National Space Council. Signed December 1st, it created a council of a whole bunch of different people in the government to advise on policy regarding space. But that doesn't matter. What does matter is Space Council is cool as hell. Glory to the eternal galactic American Empire. Signed on December 13th, we have Executive Order 14058, which is another in a line of EOs from other administrations aimed at modernizing customer service when dealing with the federal government. Things like completely revamping, or at least improving, a whole ton of different government websites, and ordering new online processes to be created for things like getting a passport and other quality of life things like the acceptance of e-signatures on federal websites. Basically streamlining our interaction with the state online. How cool. Let's move on to 2022. And what a jump it is. The first start of the year was pretty boring as far as executive orders go. So on April 22nd, 2022, we have EO 14072. It aims to further protect and conserve the forests of the US, especially old-growth forests. By the way, I firmly believe in old-growth forest supremacy. It does extend beyond the US as well, as it orders a report within the year to review options for preventing international deforestation. Like with most things, this order was most likely perfunctory in nature and is unlikely to bring about massive changes on its own, but again, I'm just glad any step is being made over none. Another significant jump in time to September 30th, we have EO 14084, which aims at bolstering art and humanities. A committee was established about art and humanities within the library and museum services, with the aim of advising on how to effectively promote them and ensure art is an economically viable career option. Aren't libraries and museums genuinely some of the coolest inventions humanity has ever made? I certainly think so. EO 14087, signed October 14th, ordered a model on how to lower drug prices and a potential timeline for the implementation of that model. The model would also serve as a guide to increasing access to new drugs, therapies, and treatments to those on Medicare and Medicaid. So 2022 was a little boring, which makes sense. I mean, presidents always sign a ton of EOs their first year in office, and then the faucet slows to a trickle as time goes by. Now we reach 2023, especially April 6th, Executive Order 14094. The purpose of this order is just to update federal regulatory review to be more modern, specific, and incorporate a better contemporary understanding of how certain regulations impact the country as a whole. A necessary improvement. Something that hits a little more personally for me is EO 14095 from April 18th. Through a variety of methods, it aims to provide better help and improve the financial status of educators and caregivers across multiple fields. This includes better funding for a variety of programs which employ caregivers, better wages, efforts to reduce crises like nurse turnover rates, increased access to healthcare for these caregivers, improving worker conditions for child care workers, and other policies related to the main goal. More than most others, I hope this order was successful. Back to back, baby, with EO 14096, which was signed on April 21st. This one is very long, and I recommend reading it yourself if you're curious about all the details. Seriously, there's 11 sections and like 20 million subsections. Basically, it furthers a commitment to environmental justice and has every federal agency examine their actions and how said actions impact the environment and people's relation to the environment around them. And obviously, the big goal is to rectify any injustice and environmentally harmful practices. In line with this, it also expands information collection efforts with a new subcommittee and other policies towards gathering relevant data. Also, Section 6 is dedicated towards ensuring that the public is made aware, in a timely manner, of toxic chemical releases. Frankly, it's worrying this had to be specifically called out, but better late than never, I guess? The rest of the year was pretty moot. Not bad necessarily, just underwhelming. So the next is from March 6, 2024, EO 14119. The first half of it admittedly isn't that interesting to me, for although I generally support apprenticeship programs, I don't necessarily support more people working at select government agencies. But the second part is something that may prove quite beneficial, which is the re-implementation of labor management forums for various agencies, providing an additional method by which unions and state employers can hold discourse. Granted, this has potential to be abused given it is a state apparatus, but one can hope. From March 18th, there's EO 14120, which identifies and tells agencies to attempt to rectify an incredibly large gap in health research. That gap, of course, being the health of women. As the first section helpfully points out, the notion of including women in clinical trials used to be revolutionary, which means many diagnostics and treatments were developed without women in mind and thus failed to account for women's health. Hell, it wasn't until I believe a few years ago that people finally started realizing crash test dummies for vehicle safety tests almost exclusively used male-based body plans. And surprise, surprise, a lot of people got all pissy that it was pointed out. Besides the point. What's important is that this is another step in not only identifying the problem, but also fixing it, especially in regards to getting greater female participation in clinical trials and other data gathering efforts. And that's the last one. Of course, every year after a president's first hardly has any executive orders to begin with, and most of the important ones will be dealt with first, as to be expected. So for the rest of 2024, it was generally neutral, and 2025, short as it was for Biden, was mostly concerning the upcoming transition between agency staff. So here you have 24 executive orders from the Biden admin that I believe are, if not beneficial in execution as is wont for federal policy, at least beneficial in theory. Just a shame 12 of them were revoked day one of the new presidency, including EOs I was extremely hopeful for, such as ending federal private prisons contracts and promoting museum and library services, but what can you do? I don't want to be negative here. Trump will even get his own time in the limelight come the next cycle when I get to talk about the good EOs he signs. I might even make it retroactive too. But for now, although this was a short one, and what a funny joke one can make about that, that's all I have. If for some reason one of you is autistic enough as I am to look through these orders and you have found one that you really like that I didn't cover here, feel more than free to let me know in the comments your thoughts, and I'm more than willing to be convinced to make an amendment to this. Until that time comes, make sure to check out the EOs I mentioned here if there are any that meet your fancy, as every link to each individual one is available in the description below. And of course, while you're booping about down there, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It really does get me a hit of dopamine every time, an increasingly scarce resource. I suppose if I want more, I'll have to make more videos though, huh? Well, I'll see what I can do. Until then, this has been 808 Politics. Never stop learning.